Okay, so our next presentation today is Brian Macklin. His name is also on the walls of St. Mike's Tutor. Graduated a couple years ago and is now at HQO. And when we talk about his career moves since Bentley in the area of data and software engineering.
Yeah, so first of all, I wanted to say thank you to Fareed. That is an extremely hard presentation to follow. I think that was awesome. So thank you for that. So to talk a little bit about myself, I'm originally from Long Island, New York, born and raised there. Had a good time growing up. And I really picked up an interest in data and programming while I was here at Bentley. So although I graduated with a finance degree and a CIS minor, kind of like the inverse of what Freddie's experience had been, I really thought like before I even graduated from school that I wanted to get into the technology and data space. So even though I graduated with a finance degree, I kind of knew that I wasn't really going to be taking any jobs in the finance realm. So right out of school, I took a job with the Hartford Insurance Group, and I was doing a lot of cloud stuff like AWS engineering, if any of you guys are familiar with AWS. But similar to Freddie, I really didn't think that was technical enough. So I kind of pivoted to a data engineering consulting job for 5 or 6 months. And to echo a sentiment that Fareed had in his presentation, like if you're not enjoying your job, like go out and find one, because there's really nothing keeping you where you are if you're not happy there. I personally don't think that you owe an employer of yours anything and any amount of time in your life. So that's just kind of my 2 cents. If you're not enjoying your role, like it's absolutely okay. And you should kind of work towards and think about, okay, what about your role don't you like, and how to sort of move towards a role that is more rewarding for you personally. That's a little bit about me. So now I'll move on to like what we actually do at HQO. So we are a pretty early stage startup, founded in late 2018, and at the base level, we sell tenant experience to commercial real estate buildings. So what does that actually mean? So we have an iOS and Android app that kind of allows tenants of commercial real estate buildings to interact in the following ways. We have an order ahead platform. That would mean like, okay, I want lunch from the Chipotle that's down the street. Let me order it ahead and have it delivered to the lobby of my building. And I could go downstairs to pick it up and then come right back up and continue with my day. We also sell resource booking and visitor registrations. So some, and more commonly, buildings have like, let's say common spaces within their building, let's say the gym or a bike room or yada yada, or even like bookable conference rooms. So that would all kind of fall underneath the resource booking vertical. Like think booking physical resources that are a part of a building, and not a part of your particular company's office suite. Visitor registration, kind of exactly what it sounds like. Visitor comes to the building to visit tenant X, and we just kind of provide a streamlined approach to having the building check them in and verifying their identity, et cetera, et cetera. Next, and maybe the most important functionality of our mobile app is mobile access. So we integrate with a whole bunch of different mobile access providers like Proxy, STID, HID, et cetera, so that a user in a tenant company within a building can swipe into the front door of the building, can access the elevator, can access their own office suite, and so on and so forth. And then lastly, we also provide a platform within that application for building managers and landlords to have like programming and content and actually communicate with the tenants and the the people that are actually occupying their space. Lastly, and this is, I'm going to talk about this a lot more because this is specifically what I do at HQO. We provide a data platform and dashboards and insights to building managers regarding how tenants and users are actually interacting with the functionalities listed above. So now I thought I'd talk a little bit about like what I specifically do at HQO. So I'm an engineer on the data team. If you're familiar with like SQL, you might say that I'm the union of a software engineer and a data engineer. I really interact with almost every layer of our data stack, from backend production or just like sending the message to a messaging platform. And then I'm also kind of involved in every step downstream of that, relating to data modeling, actually extracting, doing transformations, and loading the data into a warehouse like Redshift, as Fareed mentioned, or Snowflake. And then ultimately, I'm also involved in like the visualization side of things and putting together dashboards and yeah, ultimately embedding them in our web application for the client.
No, you're opening the file within another function. Yeah.
And hopefully this isn't too hard to see. I have a little mock-up here of kind of what I actually do on a day-to-day basis. So all the way to the left there, that's supposed to simulate like a front end event, if you will. Like a user clicks this button within the application or something like that. Like maybe a user is trying to access their suite and they swipe and try to unlock their office suite. So we capture all kinds of events like that coming from the front end. And basically similar to the demo that Fareed had of APIs, we basically have like a dedicated endpoint to receive events coming from the front end. And then we'll ingest them into a platform known as Kafka, which is essentially can be thought of like as just like a black box that receives messages and sends them off somewhere downstream. It's actually a really complicated platform, but obviously we don't have time to cover any of that today. And then kind of the green pathway there on the bottom represents like backend events. So like certain events aren't inherently front end, like it's not a user clicking a button or a user sending a mobile access attempt from their phone. Like some events that we have are inherently spawned in the back end. And we basically have an ingestion process for those as well. We'll stage them into what we call decorated Kafka topics, which basically means like this is one of our messages and tables that we want to send to the warehouse that we use, which in our case it's Snowflake, not Redshift. Yeah, so and then Kafka Connect is essentially will help to take data out of Kafka, which right now we're just thinking as a black box, and consume that into a service that Amazon offers called S3. And S3 is basically just like a distributed file system. For the purposes of this conversation, like S3 is just a place where you can store and organize files. And then, yeah, so we have some like automated processes to read from the S3 buckets we want and kind of ingest them into Snowflake as SQL tables, which hopefully you're all familiar with. And then lastly, downstream of Snowflake, we write more SQL in a Google product called Looker. And essentially we make dashboards in Looker, and then we would embed them in the client application for analytics purposes. So I know that was a little fast, and that I just kind of want to stop there maybe and see if there's any questions at this point in the presentation.
Are you expected to know, like I know, like Apache Snowflake and stuff. Like, are you expected to know all that stuff, or do you kind of like learn it on the job?
Yeah, so I would say like pretty much everything I do has been learned on the job. I really agree with what Fareed had said earlier, just in terms of like exposing yourself to the concepts early on, like SQL and just like syntax, like programming syntax, like what a for loop is, what like conditional logic is, and so on and so forth. But like the actual technologies I use on a day-to-day basis, I would say like I almost entirely learned on the job. Anybody else have a question about what's going on here, or otherwise I can go ahead and move on to a similar section as what Fareed had in his presentation, just like how did Bentley kind of prepare me for what I'm doing now? So yeah, I figured I would just kind of list out some of the courses that I thought were influential and kind of piqued my interest in data and programming in general. So I'm not going to go ahead and read through them, but yeah, I mean, these were the classes that really kind of solidified my desire to get into data engineering and software engineering. So that pretty much wraps up my portion of the presentation. I was really hoping it would kind of be engaging and people would ask questions. So yeah, feel free to ask anything you've got in mind.
Tom, go ahead and you can stop sharing.
So in terms of your class list for influential classes, what about Calculus 3 really, I guess, piqued your interest in this field or helped influence you?
Yeah, I'm not sure that that one is entirely related. I know some of you guys were interested in learning about data science. I'm not particularly involved on a day-to-day basis in like generation of data science models, testing and validating model accuracy, and so on and so forth. It is something I'm interested kind of in on the side though. So basically my thoughts on like entering the data science world is that you should be learning all of the math. Like don't try and go ahead and jump into the tools, because kind of as Fareed and I had mentioned, anything tool-based you're going to learn on the job. So I would say there's really no shortcuts, and you're going to need to grind out Calc 3 and linear algebra and like be very, very comfortable with those concepts to set a good foundation for a career in data science.
Thank you.
Does it make sense? Now we have a sort of attraction.
And thank you so much. This was a very wonderful presentation. I do have a question, and actually can be a question to Fareed as well. If you could name a couple of things that you're most passionate about your work, and also a couple of things that could be better, that would be very helpful to know.
So Fareed, do you want to just go first, because we'll just keep the same order?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, for my job, I think the best thing I would like is there's always something new happening. It's mainly project-based work. Every client has a new issue. And so I actually have been, funny enough, been on this one client for a year now, but they've been constantly throwing new things at me. So if it's not a new client, the client has different things for you to work on, which is nice. There are some consulting fields where essentially you would be a part of that client, like you just are there 100% of the time. I haven't had that yet, which is, in my opinion, nice. I don't want that. And if you like traveling, there's tons. Everyone would love it if you could travel as well. I don't travel anymore. It's more of a personal preference. I try not to, probably once or twice a year. And just for the things that I personally don't like is sometimes the meetings do get a little overboard. There's some memes and like cliches that like, oh, this could have been an email kind of stuff. And that is very true. A lot of times people just find it easier to have like a 5-10 minute conversation over the phone rather than an email. And I agree and disagree at some points. But having that sort of calendar management is very real in client work.
Yeah, so I guess I can give a stab at answering that question as well. I guess like the number one thing I enjoy about being a developer or a data engineer or anything really similar to that is like you get to write code or whatever it is that's actually involved with the functionality of your product. Like I might write a piece of software that receives an event and sends it downstream somewhere, but like actually looking at the impact of that and seeing that like, oh, this code that I wrote is necessary for this dashboard downstream, like that's really cool in my opinion. And that's probably what I enjoy most about what I do. In terms of what is not so enjoyable, like obviously everything we talked about today was in a very ideal world. In the real world, data is really messy and there might have been a decision made 5 to 10 years before your time. And kind of that's just been how it's been done since. And you have to kind of just jump in and kind of support that. So sometimes it might be what you call technical debt. So it's not always innovation per se that you're working on and new functionality. Oftentimes, like you just kind of have to keep up with certain architectural decisions that have been made before your time, and you just kind of roll with the punches, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, I just want to tell a quick funny story on that is there was a financial client I'm working on about 20 years ago. They started this certain database. They didn't think the seconds mattered on the interaction that they're working with. So they just had a date and an hour. And so now with my work, I do very like heavy customer interactions. So if you click on something within a second and something else happens, we like to track those interactions. So then we asked them like, oh, do you have timestamps on these interactions? And they're just like, oh no, can you figure it out? And we're just like, how do we deal with this? So I mean, long story short, we ended up like connecting the table to like 3 other tables just to get the proper timestamp. But that's just one example of I could definitely relate, Ryan.
Thank you. This was great. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for.
Did either of you ever get put on a project that wasn't your first choice of what you wanted to work on, but you had to do it anyway? And if so, how did you then change direction to influence your manager to say, I'd rather do something else? So when I worked in the industry, that happened a lot.
Yeah, so my first job, as I mentioned, I was working at the Hartford Insurance Group. And the nature of that role was kind of like a rotational program. So like you kind of just got thrown into your first rotation without much choice. And yeah, I mean, long story short, I ended up leaving the Hartford before my first rotation was up. So yeah, I would say definitely there's a couple different routes that you can take if you're unhappy in your current role. First would be do exactly what Mark said and converse with your manager and just say, listen, like, I'm really not happy here. I want to be doing XYZ differently. I'm not getting to do those things. So please help me to find a role that is more fulfilling for me. And then ultimately, if that conversation doesn't happen, or if for whatever reason they can't support you in that, then I would say, kind of as Fareed and I had both mentioned, it's not a bad thing to be moving jobs or looking for new jobs.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what I did too. At my first job, I guess as an example, is I was put on a client where it was a financial bank, and I just did heavy Excel like stuff that it wasn't really for me. I thought honestly I would do a lot more technology consulting, not Excel, stuff. And I talked to my manager and I asked multiple times if I could be put into the data analytics department, the DNA. And honestly, for maybe 6 months of going back and forth, not like constantly, but during like an annual review or the halfway mark, they're like, oh yeah, when a client comes our way, you'll be the first choice, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I still to this day, I don't know if it was just like a lie, or I don't know. I really don't know, but effectively, I just said sure, an opportunity came my way, and I left. And I told them, hey, I want something more technical, and I brought it to their attention. They didn't really, I guess, act fast enough, which can't really blame anyone if you're not getting the client work. And then I went on to a new job. No hard feelings. They understood, and I understood, and it's just the kind of way of life there. That's another side note too. When you do leave jobs, don't burn any bridges. Unless for some weird drastic reason you want to. But if you keep those connections, I still have my old manager, liking posts and saying congrats on my LinkedIn stuff, and it's always good to keep those connections alive.
Yeah, I definitely can't stress that enough. Definitely never burn any bridges, even if you want to. Yeah, and I definitely had the same exact experience as Fareed. Just like there's never really been any hard feelings. Kind of as Fareed had in his presentation, everybody's a human, and everybody ultimately wants what's best for themselves, especially in the context of work, like something you're going to be doing for the rest of your life, potentially. So yeah, I definitely don't think that it's ever really, nobody's ever going to get upset with you for exploring other options and doing what's best for you in your mind and in your heart.
Yeah, I do have to drop. Actually, just realized the time as well. I have a 3 o'clock. But if there's any other questions, just feel free to email me or connect on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer as well. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for being here.
Have a good one.
Good to see you back here.
Thank you.
Any last questions for Ryan before we stop? In that case, thank you all for coming. If you're able to, please join us Friday for open house at 2 o'clock. Thanks for being part of this fall's topic and tech series, and hopefully we'll get to do this again in the spring.